Hello and welcome back to the worst War Machine channel on the internet. I'm Malorian, and it's time for another War Machine Weekly, and a bonus one because we have a new Content Overlord. So Alec Luta just jumped in and went straight to top tier, and what Alec Luta wants me to talk about is, Malorian, when are hills going to come back into the game? Now, this was first suggested as a topic to be voted on. It was actually one of the things we're on the current vote. It didn't win this week, but it was funny, like that's the time that he jumps in. And I think originally when he asked this, it was all just a joke, right? Because he also added in because like, that's a hill I want to die on. But I feel like this is actually a very good question because hills are something that are very centric to tabletop war games that Privateer Press just like threw in the garbage, and it feels like there's a void there. There's something we need to be dealing with. So the way that I'd like to take this video on is, first I want to explain how hills used to work. I'm going to then transition into their problems, and then we're going to talk about what they could be in the future. So what were hills before? What were these, things in War Machine that were the bumps on the ground? Now, what they were is they had a couple of rules. Some of them were used, some of them were not used, which is what we'll get into like the problems with them. But they were basically another form of defensive terrain. So the first part of defense is that they had elevation. So if you were on the hill, you would get +2 defense. And this was something where like normally like there's cover, there's concealment, you can only get one of those. Well, if you had something like, like a hill and then it had like a trench on it, those things could combine. So that was already like the first thing where like, okay, this can combine, but that can't, a little bit different there. Plus, hills were something where there was no offensive bonus to being on top of a hill except for a line of sight. So if I'm on a hill, I can now see over things that are my normal base size. So that was the other advantage, is that if I'm up high, I can be seeing out further than I normally would be. Now, there was another part of hills that was not used very much, and that was fact that they could block line of sight. Now, this is going to get into how things were a little bit complicated, but it turns out that your models that you might look at and you're like, I want to grab one that's painted. Oh, here's a Strange Ways, and it is a model. Look at it. It has arms, it has legs, it has all these things. Wrong. When it comes to War Machine, this is a cylinder. From the base, it goes up, and there is a set height. And it doesn't matter if this is a small base. This and a half jack, I could grab a little trench dog, whatever I want. Its literal height, like its physical height there that you see, is not the height that it is. If you look in the actual rules, there is a set height that these models have. Now, typically these don't matter, right? If I have a small base and a medium base and a small base on the other side, look, I cannot see that model on the other side, assuming it's all lined up, because this larger base is blocking me. That's easy. If we have a small, a medium, and then a large, the small can see the large, but the large can't see the small. I don't understand why, but it's the logic that we use in the game. And people think of it that way. It's not the heights of the actual models. It's just, are you a small, medium, large, a huge, super large that we have, whatever coming in now. Those are what we care about, and not the set heights that they actually are. Here's the problem. Those set heights are actually important when it comes into how it interacts with 3D terrain. So if you have a house that is this height, literally this height, well, that's then going to define whether it actually blocks a regular model that is a huge base, large base, whatever, because you can compare those two heights of, again, not the literal height of the model, but the defined height of the base size, and then you can know whether it's supposed to block line of sight or not. Now, this gets very complicated now, and we've been dealing with 2D terrain, where it's like, oh, I guess that doesn't block line of sight or anything, and it comes more down to the meta of, like, you have to kind of have an understanding of how large these are, and if you don't know that this is an issue, if you ever see a large, like, house on the table, and there's huge bases involved, you better ask your opponent, is this house larger or smaller than that colossal, because that's going to be very important. And a lot of people don't think about it until it's too late, and then like there's no point of return. There's no way to literally resolve that issue. Now, we're kind of going off on a little tangent, except this also applied to hills, because hills could block line of sight to things. Now, this didn't come up a lot because people didn't normally make that large of hills. Maybe they're 2D terrain, but even if they made 3D terrain, people don't typically make massive, massive hills because they break models. And so, you know, like, first of all, that was supposed to be part of it too, that because you have a model on a hill, it can see over things of the same base size. You didn't actually literally add the size to it, but you are supposed to be blocking that to the models that are on the other side. So if you did have a hill that was larger than what a small model was, okay, then you can't see them on the other side. And that's cool and that's interesting, and it was never ever used ever, ever, ever. So that's something that's important. But again, the reason why it wasn't is because big hills break models. Whether we're talking about like a plateau that you put models on top, and if they're half on, they like, woo, fall off and they break an arm, or whether we have like a slanted hill, and no matter like how we try and do this, and again, the less of a slant that is, the smaller the hill's gonna be, that's still a tilt where those like top heavy models will just fall over and break and chip and all those awful things. So it was never really used for the whole like height thing, just because that's physically how it worked, plus a lot of times people forgot that was even a part of the game anyway. And so that's what the rules were, and we're already getting into some of the problems there. There's the physical problems that you put things onto hills and they fall and they break, and then there's also the problem that the rules were a little bit confusing. So like, wait a second, when I'm on a hill, do I just see over everything? Is it that one base size? Do I have to like measure the hill and add it to mine? How does that work? When I have like something that's like a forest on top of a hill or a trench on a hill, what things stack, what things don't stack? How does that work? So between all that confusion and all that stuff, Privateer Press took it away. Now, although they took it away, a lot of people don't realize that they also replaced it with something. And I want to lead you into this idea with what hills kind of actually were. So imagine this. If I'm a regular infantry and I got archers on the other side and I'm booking it to try and get there, if I stay in the middle of the table, there's no bonuses. I'm being shot in the face just like normal, but at least I'm not being slowed down. If I go behind that wall, I'm getting cover, but now I can't charge out from it. So if I'm planning to run next turn, that's okay. But unless I have Pathfinder, that's a problem. If I got a forest, if I have rubble, I can slowly work myself into it and may be harder to hit, but then I'll be slower to get out as well. So as an infantry person, I was worried about like, man, if I want to do this, it's going to slow me down. This is where hills came in. Hills were something where, look, I can run up onto this hill. It's not slowing me down. I can still charge off of it. And yet I'm getting all the defensive bonuses. They're having a harder time hitting me. And if we're actually playing with people that know the rules, I can maybe go behind them and they can't even see me to shoot me at all. Now, this is gone, but if you think about it, like I was saying, there's something that's almost exactly the same, and that's clouds. You may have noticed that as hills went out, clouds came in. And what are clouds? Clouds are something where if I go inside them, I have a defensive bonus, I have concealment. If I'm behind them, we know that we can't be seen unless you have like true sight or something like that. And my infantry can just run and charge, not impeded. I mean, of course, if I'm on the other side and I can't see you, I guess I'm running, but that's doing purposely, like by the rules, the same thing that hills did, but way cleaner, right? Whereas there's all the confusion about hills, clouds just seem to be so much easier to understand in the way that they work. Plus, physically, they're really easy as well. Whether it's a 2D piece of terrain that goes down, and so like we don't care either way, or even if you have something where it's like, you know, cotton balls or, you know, like whatever you have there to show the clouds, it's really easy to put your models in within those and they don't fall down, they don't break. So clouds are functionally just better hills. Now, that being said, there's a lot of us that want hills to come back in the game. There's, you know, all of us vets that have all these old hills that we want to use, whether they're 2D or 3D. Plus, like I said, it's something you expect to see on the table. It's something we're like, hey, I'm having this battle. I'm guessing it's not completely flat. There should be some bumpy parts. They should have a place in the rules. Now, let's talk about that. Going forward, where could we find some design space to put hills in the game that would actually serve a good purpose and be different from everything else that's out there? And I feel that if we look at it, there's actually a very interesting spot for it. Now, for starters, do we want to do the whole line of sight thing, where if you're on top of a hill, you can get better line of sight? That could be something we could do. As I said before, that was something that was found to be confusing. So I think that would be I would not suggest it. It's a design space that's right now not shown by anything else. Maybe you just make it easier and say, look, if you're on a hill, nothing blocks line of sight. Then again, that's giving an advantage to the gun lines. And do we want to be giving advantage to the gun lines? The guns want to go up on these hills and say, haha, I can see over your models and shoot you. And I don't really feel that's what we want in the game, right? Terrain is trying to break up things and make it harder for gun lines just to be like, haha, we're in the desert, pew, 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 I shoot everything. So I think the line of sight thing adds confusion and is not moving the game in a direction that we want to go. Okay, how about that defensive thing, right? Before we had elevation, you got better defense. And as I said, first of all, if we do this new elevation thing or old elevation thing again, it's not really helpful because all the interactions people were having confusion with. As well, I struggle with the fact that even should be a thing. Because if I have somebody that's standing, I might be able to see them, but there's a whole battle going on, I might have a hard time hitting them with an arrow because there's other things in the way. But if somebody's standing up on a hill, hey, I can see you easy, boo! And so, sure, there's the argument that maybe you're so high that I have a hard time shooting my arrow up there, but literally, if you're up on top of a mountain, you're not in this battle. You probably shouldn't be incorporated in this. You're gone. You're watching us. So I don't think we should be thinking about hills being that high that's actually making me harder to shoot an arrow at you. So I don't think there should even be a defensive bonus for being on a hill. Well, okay, what can we do with hills then? We're saying we're not going to do a line of sight. We're not going to do the defensive bonus. Could we do an offensive bonus? Should things shoot farther? Well, probably not. Again, if I'm shooting an arrow from up here or down here, yes, if I'm higher, it would take longer to kind of fall, but it would not actually go that much farther. So I don't think that makes sense. Plus, I don't want to be helping out the shooting armies. We talked about that. But what about if you're a combat army? How would a combat army actually take advantage from a hill? Well, I'm not going to be hitting better or harder because I'm on a hill, but maybe speed is something that we could be putting into there. If I'm putting myself on top of a hill, my opponent coming up the hill, the reason why they're at a disadvantage is that they're going to be slowed down while they're trying to go down the hill. Whereas if I'm charging down, I'm going to be going faster because gravity be helping me at that point. So maybe we can take that logic and add it to the game. What if the rules for hills is that if you were trying to move onto a hill, you'd be slowed down, which also kind of puts in an investment to actually get there in the first place, I suppose. And then if you're going off the hill, you get sped up. Makes logical sense. Is something that's not covered by anything else. And yeah, this is something that's pretty interesting. Now, how are we actually going to be dealing with this? Should it be like rough terrain if you're charging up? No, I don't think that makes sense because it's just going to be dealing with that last little bit and might not even matter. But I feel that if any part of your movement would take you onto the hill, it should slow you down X inches. I don't know what that X should be. And if you're charging off the hill, you should be sped up by that probably same amount. So if it's 1 inch, 1 inch, 2 inch, 2 inch, whatever it is. I think 1 inch would probably be too little of an effect, but say 2 inches, I think 3 inches would be too extreme, so probably something more around the two. I don't know. We could play with that, but I think that's the design space that these hills can really shine. Plus, I think we should just kind of set it so that It blocks line of sight to small base models. Get rid of this garbage of like, oh, how high is actually the hill? No, because we don't want to be dealing with like people being forced to actually be making bigger hills to make them dangerous. We'll just set it in the game that hills block line of sight to small base models. Done. That's it. In fact, I think they should be doing this and applying it to other things too, and saying that for forests and for buildings, you don't care about the actual height. They block line of sight to larger, smaller base models. Done. It makes things so much cleaner for everything. Get rid of those old rules. They're a pain. This is the way to go. And all of a sudden, we have these fancy new hills that give a dynamic feel to the actual battleground and actually do something very interesting on there as well. Now, some of you might be saying out there, wait a second, Malorian, you're wrong. You had said before that your infantry going on to here would not be slowed down like they go into the rough terrain. But if you actually think about it, Malorian, you are slowed down going onto the hill, unless you're deploying on it, and then you're probably not going off that far. So the amount that they're charging out extra is being lost by what they're going on. And I'd say you're right. That is how math works. However, that means that it literally has no effect on them, right? The amount that they're losing is the amount that they're gaining. However, they're threatening further out. So if we're dealing with something like archers that have a range, they're like, if I want to get closer to shoot them, because now they're threatening me from further out, I have to get closer to do so. And if I'm a combat army, well, then I can just be setting myself up for that longer threat. And it makes these interesting areas around hills where whoever's king of the hill can lord over and threaten things around it. And I think that's a very interesting design space, an investment to get on, and then a good threat that's coming off of there. And I think it's fantastic. And then I think the best thing about this is that it is so easy for Privateer Press to do this. You have to change nothing in the rules. You just have to go in there and say, for the next Steamroller package, this is what a hill is. The end. That's how they do it now. They don't always just put it in the main rules. They just put them into the Steamroller packages, and that's it. So in the next Steamroller package, there could be a hill in there, described the way that I just described it, and there you go. Everyone's playing out their hills, and we have something usable. Will models maybe still fall off and get broken? Maybe, and I'm sorry about that, but at least now that the actual height of the hill doesn't matter anymore, at least now you can feel that you can actually make your hills a little bit lower and have a little bit more of a less of a slant, so they'd actually be physically safer while still having the cool rules of being the actual hill. So there you go. Thank you, Alec Luta, for joining on as a patron and for this great question. I hope all of you out there enjoy listening to this, and maybe you have a different idea. Maybe you think no, hills are garbage, keep them out of here forever, or maybe you feel you have a different idea for hills, and I'd love to hear it down in the comments. So there you go. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you later. Bye.